in really emerging businesses, sustainable businesses. How are firms combining, how are companies combining in new and innovative ways to produce new products? So taking some traditional agriculture and combining it with a green firm. Of course, a lot of new food firms are doing that, but also biofuels and things like that. So I've become very interested in these new recombinations, and I think that a lot could be done in the rural area around these sort of new firm formations that are emerging in response to a less carbon-heavy economy that seems to be the new trend. I've also become very interested in kind of local and regional governments and the importance we now see even on very traditional local politics. As many of us know, municipalities have for about the last 15 to 20 years have really been the recipients of a lot of downloading and offloading from more senior levels of government, and all of a sudden they have to deal with a lot more complex issues than they ever had to deal with. It's not just about roads and sewers, but it's also about affordable housing. It's about business attraction and retention. It's about green living. Public health issues now are huge with rising health and obesity issues across the country. So all of a sudden there's this huge amount of pressure put on local governments to actually run these cities. But what's unfortunate is that at the municipal level, less and less there's incredible voter apathy. People aren't turning out. It's not seen as an important level. But these governments have to think even more about fiscal sustainability. I've been following a lot of the bankruptcies, the local municipal bankruptcies that are going on in the U.S. Anyone who's been reading the papers in the last couple of weeks about Europe and its fiscal challenges. So all these issues around fiscal sustainability, public accountability, the importance of civic leadership, the importance of citizen involvement, capacity building, and many of you may have heard this term that seems to be becoming a new buzz term, but what does it mean, resiliency? Again, it's thinking about why is it that some regions tend to be more resilient to economic crisis than others. A good example was Dr. Christofferson's talk, which the Moneson Center sponsored with the Department of Geography in the winter of this term, where she talked about older cities in upper state New York, like Rochester and Albany, that had actually fared quite well in the economic downturn, largely because they had some interesting new firm formation, they had been fairly responsible fiscally, and they had good civic leadership. So there was a lot of, that would be something to follow too, looking at places that have done quite well or held their own during this global recession, asking the question why? Why is that? And then of course thinking about all these issues around affordability, active transport. We know that downtown revitalization is a huge issue now for a lot of smaller centers. And certainly for Eastern Ontario, that came up as an important research area, and that is a personal interest of mine. And I think it's such an asset for Eastern Ontario because there's so many beautiful historic downtowns that are just kind of waiting to be revitalized, and it's just such a treasure, I think, for Eastern Ontario, and it's something it would be lovely to see if everyone could get together and work on those. And then finally, public health issues as well, and all this is interrelated. If you can get people to walk more, actively participate in their community. So those are issues that I'm interested in, and then of course this other issue that some of our colleagues have been working on, like Dr. Leela Viswanathan, on attracting and retaining skilled immigrants, which is an important issue for Eastern Ontario as well. And I think there's a real opportunity there. If you can have these livable and sustainable cities, how can we attract and retain the immigrants that are coming to the big centers around it? I mean, again, Eastern Ontario is in that unique position where they're close to the big cities and they can really work collectively to have the best of both worlds, whereas some of the rural communities in Eastern Canada are a lot more isolated and they don't have the ability as much to attract and retain, just largely because of transportation issues. So these are just some of the research resources that I'm looking at, if you're interested in how I sort of thought about these new metrics, you can read about it in this paper. And then a colleague of mine, Kevin and I work with quite closely, Tara Vinogre, who's at the University of Waterloo, is doing some very interesting work looking at these issues of sustainability and how can we actually measure them and link it more explicitly to business formation. So I will now pass it over to my colleague Kevin.
Thanks, Betsy. So I'm pretty sure this was a recipe for disaster, to try to say, have 3 academics talk and get them all done within 55 minutes and actually allow some time for you to ask questions. So I have no slides, which is good at least to help limit a little bit. And my real goal is to talk a little bit about, as far as the Martin Prosperity Institute and what we're looking at in terms of future research, and with kind of specifically things that are more tied, obviously, to the kind of rural or non-urban agenda, at least, and kind of how those things fall in place. The one big thing I think that's important that reflects both of what Yolande and Betsy have talked about is one of the things that we're always looking at and kind of working on are measurement and measurement issues, and trying to understand how to measure not only kind of what does this creative economy mean, but other things surrounding that, and measures of performance, measures of how our regions are doing, and the things that are happening. And one of the key elements with that is actually understanding that it's not just about growth. Growth is important, but growth isn't everything. It's about prosperity. And prosperity isn't necessarily growth, and growth isn't necessarily prosperity. So in actually coming to that realization, it's important to think about what are some of the important things and critical issues that any region is facing, and what does it mean for a region to be prosperous. So how do you do that? So it's one of the key elements that we're working on. One of the other big things that we're spending a lot of time right now on is looking more specifically at skills and the kinds of skills that people have. Right? We always say the creative class, as originally kind of defined, is people who are being paid to think. Right? So you can talk about creative occupation or creative industries, but we really focus much more occupationally. It's what are people doing, and are they being paid to think or not? So it is technology workers, it's artists and designers, it's business, medical, legal professionals, and it's educators, right? So it's a large group, about 30% of the workforce, but it's people who are being paid to think. And the real issue now is we've looked at this occupational viewpoint is helpful because we don't care necessarily. I'll say we're industry agnostic. You can be in whatever industry you're in. It's are you being creative or not that really matters. So green is important, but so is traditional manufacturing. As long as you can be creative in what you're doing. I do some work with the certified managerial accountants in helping them judge their creative accountants award, which I always think is interesting. But one of the nominees this year was somebody who actually was doing work in the fastener industry, one of the largest suppliers of fasteners to the rest of industry in Canada, the largest supplier, in fact, of fasteners in Canada. And they were trying to figure out how do they kind of creatively enhance the fastener industry, and one of the things that they did was they actually teamed up with the Olympics. So they became the official provider of fasteners and safety devices to the Olympics, which the Olympics had never had before. That's somebody being creative in a very traditional industry. That's good. Those are the kinds of things that you want to have happen. And so in this looking at creativity and saying it's not necessarily about, yes, you want cultural things and you need arts and all these things and designers and all these things going on, but it's really creativity can be applied anywhere. And so part of that is looking at skills and really understanding what are the skills that people have and are using, and how are those skills translated into innovations, how are those skills turned into wages, and what's happening with those. And so we're spending more time really looking at kind of deconstructing jobs themselves, looking at the actual skills and what's going on, and that's incredibly important. And then understanding, once you know what those skills are, how do you build and develop those skills locally? What do the colleges do? What do the universities do? How do you kind of build the skills in your community that are the skills that are going to be needed going forward? So that's one of the big areas. Another thing that we're working on quite a bit is really understanding the service class. And when I say the service class, I mean those people that are in the low-wage service jobs that basically are doing either personal service or accommodations or food service, right, where they're the people who are mowing lawns and cutting hair and doing dry cleaning. and working in retail establishments and in food service who don't get paid very much. They're about 50% of the workforce, but they only get about 30% of the wages.